Where you going? No, man, you got the right classroom. Come on in, take a seat beside me, my friend. Look, here comes T.A. Charlie.
Morning, you're watching The Road to Concord with Professor Joe Bakanovic. Homeroom is on Rumble. You just go to Rumble and you search the channels for The Road to Concord. It's one word. When you find it, you go ahead and you click follow. It might mean you got to set up an account, but it's fast, and it's easy, and it's free. I did it. You can do it. For those technologically challenged members of the class, you can also catch us on Facebook, Twitch, and Twitter, and sometimes on YouTube. That's when the professor's not going to get himself censored. Mostly that's just Wednesday, but hello, YouTube, we're here today. Then you can catch the podcast after the show. It's uploaded to Podbean, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. Just look for The Road to Concord. You can go to the blog page, that's theroadtoconcord.com. That's where you'll find all your show notes and study notes and handouts for the class. Finally, you can email a professor at joe@theroadtoconcord.com. He's a little slow right now, but he'll eventually get around to emailing you back. Phones are on today, 229-469-0335, but only for registered numbers. If you wish to call in and are not registered, send us an email with your name or number, and we'll let your call go through. If you find our classes helpful, please click the thumbs up, like, subscribe, and share it with those you think could benefit from it. Just warning them, Joe, he's an acquired taste. He's a little different.
Yeah.
This show is listener sponsored, meaning we do not solicit business advertising, so we are not limited in the content we provide for y'all. With that said, we ask for your participation on a value for value basis. If you find our show of value to you, then you provide an equivalent portion of your labor and treasure through the donate link on the Road to Concord blog page, the show description on Rumble, and in the comments on the other streams.
Yeah, we know T.A. Charlie isn't all that. Now just stay seated and give the class a chance. You'll soon realize we not might be the smartest, but we independently form opinions based on reason and logic. We're free thinkers. Let's see what the Road to Concord with Professor Joe Bogdanovic has on the lesson plan for today.
Gotta love me some tortoise. Hey, we're having a bumpy start to the morning. I don't know if you've ever seen Tombstone with Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday, but Charlie and I are doing a good job of a lunger convention here. You know, Doc, I can hear Doc right now. Hey, a couple of lungers here. Charlie's getting over long COVID or whatever. And by the way, he's a walking example of how well ivermectin works.
Ivermectin is a miracle drug.
Not that the Dr. Fauci's of the world would agree, but you know, and I'm getting over my lung issues that I've had ever since Desert Storm. So we're having a good day trying to clear our throats and be ready to do the show today. Real quick, programming type note, housekeeping thing. The reason we ask you if you want to call in, you know, a lot of people might not like this, you know, send us an email with your name and number. For right now, the way we're doing this, basically you send us an email, we just put your number into the Magic Jack system. And that way we know it's you calling. And it's pretty much shut down Dodo Cop. Because if Dodo Cop sends us an email and then they call us using that phone number, we just publish it. We're allowed to dox them. And then at least that one email and phone number will become useless because I'm pretty sure we could elicit a little help out there in our listening audience. We're not a big one, but I'm pretty sure that there are several of you that would love to play with those folks. And look what it's done. It's shut them down. We still take phone calls from real class members who actually want to contribute to the class. We just don't have to deal with Dodo Cop anymore. And this will always be an issue because even Rush, even Bo Snerdley from time to time didn't catch all of the seminar callers. But I always wondered about that with Rush talking about seminar callers. I'm like, people really sit there and train how to call into these talk shows to disrupt them? Once we started this show, yep, we found out they go through a pattern. They're taught a systematic way of doing this. So
yeah, and it's not just one either. Dodo Cop is about a half a dozen individuals,
Yep.
at least so far that we've identified.
Okay. Today is Teaching Tuesday, and normally I'd teach something other than logic. Logic was almost, it's since the start of the show, Fallacy Friday. So we teach logic on Fridays. Well, we're doing the book study on Friday. The book study, the study of the American Covenant by Marshall Foster. We're going to continue doing that, and it'll take us through the rest of the summer. But I've thought long and hard on this one, and a lot of you have asked me to do this. So back to logic. Well, it is Teaching Tuesday, so I can teach whatever I want on Tuesday, right? So we're going to start a small summer series on basic logic. Basic logic. And I do mean, now this is where, excuse me, I don't mean to be doing that in the radio. I know it's not polite or professional, but just anyhow. Before we get going today, if you have any background in logic already, I'm not going to be meaning to talk down to you at all today. That's not the idea. That's not the intent. But I mean, I am going to try to do something that I tend to be a little blind to. I'm going to get down in the weeds with basic today. Because in getting ready for this class, I realized that there are a lot of terms I use with y'all on the air with, you, the audience, the classroom, that I just expect you already know because I'm that familiar with them. And familiarity breeds contempt. Well, I just expect you're going to figure this out, and you'll figure out what I'm trying to say. And that's a mistake on my part. I apologize. Today, we're going to try and fix some of that. And today is mostly going to focus on some basic philosophical terms and definitions. We've got some other things. We're going to flesh it out here with it and all, but we're going to be looking at the basics with this today. So get going. Hey, look at here, man. I got myself a chalkboard up here. Well, by the way, if you ever see this green chalkboard, up until now, I've tended to borrow things from this person or that person, don't want to reinvent the wheel. Well, if it's on the green chalkboard, it's 100% Professor Joe. I have other sources that I'm using to springboard my brain and help me, but all of this is in my own words. This is my teaching. So the chalkboards is kind of like a signature. You see that chalkboard background? That's me. That's entirely me. So not that necessarily matters for anything, buddy, but just to let you know. Logic 101, key concepts and definitions. First, before we even get going, why should I bother to learn logic? Well, there are at least 5 good reasons to study basic logic. And by basic, I do mean basic. Logic is a very deep subject, and it has many branches for it, many disciplines of logic. A lot of it I don't even consider to be logic, but if you go down that rabbit hole, you're going to run into all sorts. It can quickly get, it'll look like an engineering language, literally. When you see advanced logic being drawn out and diagrammed, it will look like mathematics on a chalkboard. It uses a lot of the same symbols, just different definitions to those symbols, but it will literally look like mathematics. So, and I might show you a picture of that in a future class, but for now, we're just going to be looking at basic logic. Why would I want to study it? There are 5 good reasons. First, logic is foundational. What do we mean by that? Well, there is a logic behind all forms of human reasoning and communication. In order to become proficient at anything, in whatever form of reasoning, communication, whatever career, whatever discipline, whatever you do, football has a logic. In order to become proficient at any of that, you have to learn how to analyze its concepts, structure, and methods. If you're going to do football, you got to learn the plays. You got to learn the stances. You got to learn how to run. You got to learn the rules. What's a penalty? What can you do? What can't you do? What's the goal of the game? You got to learn all of that. Logic teaches us how to do this analyzation efficiently. It teaches us to focus on concepts, judgments, and arguments. The central concept of a given study is defined by the terms and definitions it uses. The claims made within a given field of study are the judgments about what that field holds to be true. The defense of these claims, or justification, is achieved through reasoning and evidence presented in the form of an argument. Now, quick note. I'm going to go back and explain this, but quick note. A logical argument is not a shouting match. It's a structured series of reasons that we call premises, and they're structured to support, defend, or convince you to believe that the conclusion of the argument is true. So let's move this a little bit for the moment now that we've read that. The central concept of a given study. What's the concept of politics? To advance my party's agenda. Okay. So what are the terms or definitions in the politics? Well, if I'm going to study progressivism, that's of its special interest to us on this class, in this show. I want to study progressivism. I have to learn their terms and definitions. So when I tell you that progress in the term of a progressivism means socialism, you go, well, no, it doesn't. And I'll go, well, Woodrow Wilson said it does. He said that's the definition of progress. Progressivism, by progressive steps, what Maximilius called incrementalism, the old Roman general. Do things by little bitty steps. Take a little here, wait a minute, take another little bit. He says that is American socialism, or the method by which they will achieve it. So I'm learning his definitions according to the one who coined them and defined them. He's the ultimate authority here. Or if we're doing football, I got to learn the terms and definitions. 4 downs, a pass, a run, offense, defense, a lineman, a running back, a linebacker. I got to learn that. If you're in an orchestra, I have to learn the terms and definitions. What's a conductor? Who's a conductor? What are the woodwinds and the brass, the percussions section? I got to learn all of that. If I'm going to do a movie, what are the terms and conditions? Conductor. Not conductor. In this case, producer. Director. There, that's it. Sorry. Thank you, Charlie. Director, producer, actors, soundstage, stuntmen. A script. What is that? You got to learn the term. I think you're getting the idea here. Like I said, I don't mean to talk down to anybody today, but we are going to get very fundamental. So the central concept of a given study, what's it about? What is it primarily concerned with? And it's going to have its own language. These are the terms and definitions of that language, what it uses. The central claim made within a given field or study, that's the judgment about what that field or study holds to be true. Well, in football, the judgment is win the game. In a movie, the judgment is make a great movie, win an Oscar. Politics, the judgment is what's true is whatever the party decides to be true, at least when we're dealing with progressivism. So this is the thing. Whatever this field of study, or mathematics, okay, what's the central claim of mathematics? Well, if you properly execute the rules governing math, you'll get the correct answer for the equation or for the problem. That type of thing. Seems simple. And it is. But most of us don't ever stop to actually pay attention to this stuff. And we should. And you'll see why in a few minutes. And the defense of these claims, the justification of our what we hold to be true in any given field, it's achieved through reasoning and evidence. And this reasoning and evidence is presented in a formal form that we call an argument. It's by formal, I mean it is arranged in an orderly fashion. And like I said, this argument is not screaming at each other. That's a different definition of argument. What we're talking about, an argument is it's a series, an organized series of premises. Premises are statements of fact or assumption, and that these premises support the conclusion of our argument.
So is this kind of similar to like a court case where you've got, one
Yes.
side trying to prove their truth and the other side trying to prove their truth?
A court of law is literally a logical argument between two parties.
That's why they call it like a legal argument?
Yes.
Okay.
Literally. And when I was in logic school, when I was in philosophy, learning to get my philosophy degree and all that, we would get one of the biggest things we would do in our classes. One of the primary The first thing you had to do in philosophy school, the very first semester, you're going to go take basic logic. Everybody has to. It's first semester. You got to understand basic logic before you can really start learning anything else in philosophy. And we would be in all of our different classes. Those of us that were actually trying to learn the discipline, we would stand up and make a case. We'd make an argument in class in front of our professor and our classmates. And then you had to learn to defend your statement. And you had to do this standing up in front of everybody. And sometimes we're in a lecture hall, 110, 120, 200 people. So this is one of the places where I got used to talking in front of a group. It's also one of the reasons I got really good at thinking on my feet, is because there was no raise your hand, take your turn. If somebody wanted to attack you, they just voiced an objection to your argument and you had to defend yourself. And there'd be somebody else voicing an objection at the same time. You got good at this, or you didn't stand up and open your mouth. And if you didn't, your class participation was a goose egg. So you were not going to make an A in that class, just right off the bat. So lawyers, in theory, legal arguments are based in sound logic. In practice, legal arguments are the abuse of logic. Legal arguments are the practice of using fallacies, intentional flaws in logic on purpose to persuade you to believe that something is true when it's not. And am I saying that lawyers lie? You bet your bottom bippy I do. That's their practice. They are a horrible perversion of what logic is supposed to be. They go into a courtroom to find the truth, and they are seeking to do anything and everything but that. The prosecutor just wants his win. The defense lawyer just wants to get their client off. That's it. That's all they want. They don't care. Truth is never a court of law is not. I know they'll tell you it is. I know the judge will. They're lying. And I can make the argument for that case too, just by showing how fallacious the arguments in a courtroom are. And we'll get to that. But yes, Charlie, bingo. That's what this is all about. It's supposed to be about in the courtroom anyway. Logic is organizational. Reason number 2 to study logic. A well-organized mind is an indication of sanity. It empowers us, and it is the foundation of competence in any given field, or even in life itself. A well-organized mind is also a mark of excellence. However, a well-organized mind cannot be achieved without some understanding and mastery of logic. We live in a day and age where deception is everywhere. Logic helps us navigate this world by training us to evaluate everything we see, hear, and read. It then helps us to assimilate that information, keeping and filing that which is useful and discarding that which is not. It teaches us to be precise and to notice when precision is absent. It also leads us to ask the right questions to clarify our understanding. Let's go over this a little bit. First of all, if you ever find somebody who's got a well-organized mind, whether they've had formal training in it or not, you're dealing with somebody who understands at least a little bit about logic. Because the essence of logic is organization. You can't organize your mind, your thought process, without having some mastery of logic at some level somewhere. And if you have an organized mind and you've studied logic in some way, shape, or form, even if it's just informally on your own, that's an indication of sanity. Logic will empower you in the sense that it helps you to become competent in any field. Like if I'm studying engineering, the more I understand its language and its terms, its justifications, its goals, the more competent I become. And all you're doing is becoming competent in the logic of mathematics, of engineering. The better you become at understanding the rules and mechanics of football and the execution of those mechanics, the better you become at football. Well, you're just understanding the logic behind football. The better you become at the mechanics behind literature, how to write a good book, the better author you'll become. This is Ronnie Harrell. Liberals really hate it when a conservative clouds the issue with facts. Yeah, well, we're gonna have to get to a definition of a fact. I don't have that one in the show today, but let me write that down because we do want to cover that. I'll have to add that to the slideshow for later. Most people don't know what a fact is, but we'll get to that in a minute. Make it a note here real fast. Like I said, the slide, we live in a day of deception. It's everywhere. Confusion, nihilism. Logic will help us navigate this world. It trains us to evaluate everything. Everything you see, hear, read, everything. In getting ready for this class, I realized how rusty I'd become. And yeah, I do mean rusty. And the reason that everybody thinks I'm pretty good with logic now is just because we are, as a society, so divorced from logic. We don't understand it anymore. We don't even know it. We don't practice it. We don't study it. So when you run into anybody who has the most rudimentary understanding of formal logic, they're going to seem to be head and shoulders above everybody else around them in their thinking process. And I realized I've gotten rusty. I need to shake the rust off here. But even as rusty as I've been, I did so much work when I was younger with this. I evaluate things while I'm watching them, why I hear people talking, why I'm reading it. And I've learned to do it at such a fast rate. It seems like I'm making snap judgments. To the casual observer who doesn't know me, they'll think, oh, he didn't even hear me out. Well, in most cases, I don't need to, because I'll be listening to your argument and I'm like, oh, I know this argument. Well, no, you don't. You've never heard me. No, I haven't heard you make it before, but I've heard it before. And I know where the logical problems are with it. So I'll file that argument into the not a whole lot of worth here for me file. And unfortunately for the person talking to me, I'll inadvertently, unmeaningly, unintentionally insult them because they think that it's personal. It's got nothing to do with you. It's got to do with your logic, with your argument. I could care less about you that way. I could like you. We could be great friends, and I still don't like your argument. Your reasoning's bad. But I've gotten to where I sort through this stuff while it's happening. Sometimes I jump ahead of it. And people get mad at me like, oh, you don't know. Yes, I do. And I can't remember the last time I was wrong in this regard. Guess what? Each and every one of you listening to me today can do this too. You can get to do this. You can get to the point where you can do this just as easily and just as well. It just requires practice. It's like any other discipline. Practice, practice, practice. The more you practice, the better you get. But you have to understand the basics. So when you get really good at dealing with logic and informal logic and basic logic, the things we're going to be discussing on this show, these are easy. You just got to put a little time and a little effort in them. They're not hard. And as you perfect them, you improve your skills with it. You can listen to a news article that might have in the past confused you or misled you to believe something that wasn't true. You'd be listening to it, you go, nope. And then you'll just tune it out, because they'll get to a point where you'll go, no, I can't trust anything that follows from this point. Doesn't mean they're going to be wrong. I said, I can't trust it. And understanding logic will help you do this. And it'll help you in an organized manner run right through an argument or anybody's opinion or their position or whatever they got to say. And it'll help you sort what's useful from what's not useful, wheat from chaff, as they say. And it'll also teach you to spot the mistakes in other people's reasoning, and it'll help you ask better questions. That'll help you put a sharper focus on something so that it's better understood. You'll become more precise, and you'll learn to ask those questions that will bring more clarity either to you or to the person answering you or to both. And it's something that you can even turn on and off. If you pay attention to me, you'll know whenever I go into high gear mode. Like sometimes if you've been with the show long enough, you might remember a conversation I had with a Mr. Ford, John Ford. It was a scripture question, but this first couple of months of the show. I don't know if anybody noticed at that time, but I even sat up and got really precise with my language and my questions to him. And that's because I went into, high gear logic mode, and I was trying to do exactly what logic does for me, made me extremely precise. So my language got really tight. That's another logical word that we're not going to cover today. We'll have several of these basic definition classes, but by tight, I mean hyper focused. And he couldn't answer in a way that avoided my question. And that way, when he gave me an answer, I knew I had what I needed. It gave me clarity. It also gave him no wiggle room, which led to the inevitable conclusion here of that discussion. He got upset with me because he was trying to manipulate the discussion in his direction, and the facts weren't on his side. Logic helped me bring that discussion, that exchange it was civil. We didn't get in an argument as in yelling at each other, but it helped me deal with that discussion in a very quick way, very decisive way. And he quit calling. I wasn't ugly to him. It just real quick, he realized that if he was going to assert something that was not true, it would be exposed properly. Civil, but exposed properly. So let's go to the next one. Logic is also critical. This is related to what we were just talking about. We live in a day and age where many people believe that truth is in the eye of the beholder. This subjective way of thinking teaches that what is true for you may not be true for me. In this world of subjective thinking, it is difficult to find certainty in anything. Logic helps us find certainty by training us how to evaluate the opinions and arguments of others and to find the objective truth in everything we hear, everything we see, everything we discuss. Okay, I didn't put this in. We'll do these later, but there are two definitions that I want to go over real quick, just real fast. Kind of ahead of the lesson plan here right now. Subjective and objective. Subjective is something that depends on the opinion or personal position of another, personal opinion of a person. The color of blue. Is that the best color in the world or is it the worst color in the world? That's subjective. That conclusion, that determination is subjective. Do you like my green chalkboard or should it be a black? Well, that opinion is subjective. That's just it. Opinion and subjective. Pretty much in the terms of logic, there's synonyms. Subjective depends on the viewer. Objective is true whether you like it or not. Now, this can get kind of quirky. When I say that something's false, that can also be an objective fact. What? That sounds like a contradiction. No. Okay, if I say that, okay, if somebody in our country right now, today, we're, in the United States, if they said, this is Russia, well, the statement is false. And that is an objective fact. The fact is that the statement is false. Just like an objective fact is objective means it doesn't depend on you and I. It doesn't depend on the observer. That's what I'm trying to explain. That's the type of fact that logic wants to deal with. That's the type of fact it goes after. The problem is certain arguments cannot be objectively dealt with. You have to go to subjective. And we will deal with those in due time. This is a subject we will revisit. It's not, these are two terms that I did not want to put on the class plate today. We'll probably deal with these next week. We're going to have to get some vocabulary out of the way before we get going. And I know for this, it's going to be tedious to a lot of people. But you can't learn math if I don't teach you, the 1, 2, 3s and the basic addition and basic subtraction. Can't learn to read if I don't give you the alphabet and the sounds the letters make and how they go together to make a word. Well, this is what we're doing. We've got to go over the basics of logic. We're still going over why would I want to study logic. Logic persuades. Logic can be very persuasive to others. Persuade them to our position, to our opinion, or to our argument. Logic relies on objective truth. That's what I was just telling you about. By learning how to construct a sound, valid, and rational argument, we'll get to those terms later, but by learning how to construct a proper argument, we can better present and defend this truth to others, this objective truth that we find. It can also teach us how to evaluate other arguments. by identifying mistakes in those arguments and then explaining those mistakes to the people making them so as to correct their understanding. This is one where I will go to scripture. In the Bible, it teaches to correct other believers when they're wrong. Well, if you're a believer and you think that everything has to be done on faith, how do you correct somebody without logic and reason? You can't. The Bible tells you to be very rational, very reasonable, very logical, even in the use of the word of Yahweh, of the word of God. So if I have a fellow believer who's making a mistake, I am commanded to go to them using the word of God and reason with them, show them where their mistake is. Go to this world, the Constitution. If you've made a mistake, hey, Supreme Court Justice, what do you mean abortion is legal under the Constitution? Well, yeah, it's the right of privacy. There is no right of privacy in the Constitution unless you want to find it in the 9th and 10th Amendment, and that's okay. But the Declaration says you're created with the right to life. And then they would say, well, the Declaration of Independence has nothing to do with the Constitution. I'd say, well, the Founding Fathers tell you otherwise. Well, now you got a problem there, Supreme Court Justice, because the Founding Fathers are the supreme authority on what the Constitution means and which document is and isn't supreme over the other. And they told us that the Declaration of Independence is our founding document. It is the what and the why. It is the ideal, the goal, the target that this nation shoots for. The Constitution is just the vehicle by which we do that shooting. How do we get to there? How do we achieve our goal? And the Declaration says you have a right to life. I got a little newsflash for you, Mr. Supreme Court, Ms. Supreme Court Justice. If you disagree with that, where is the right to life in the U.S. Constitution? It's not there. It says your life cannot be denied you without due process, but it doesn't say you have a right to your life. That is found in the Declaration. And this is called reasoning. It's also a very tight argument because it's based on definitions. Whose definitions? The Founding Fathers, the men who wrote and ratified both documents. You don't get to argue with them, not rationally. And this is one of the paramount benefits of logic. What I just argued cannot be gotten around. You cannot. It's impossible. It's logically impossible to break that argument. We'll get to that in a few minutes as the class goes on. And yet we had a Supreme Court that ruled otherwise. Told you that the court is about lying and perverting truth. It's not about finding the truth. Just a quick persuade, right? Quick anecdotal story for you. I'm in logic class, Logic 101, my first semester of philosophy school. We have a child genius teaching us. His name's Mike. He's 24 years old. He's already done 4 years in the Air Force, and he's on his last year of doctorate school. He's in America's who's who of geniuses. He's an atheist, and he's a liberal. And he believes that abortion should be and is legal, and that it's not murder. The very first day of class, he tells us that our semester exam will be on one of two subjects. We have to either prove that God exists, or we have to prove that the unborn is a person and that abortion is murder. I think I've told this story before, but you may not have heard it. So we get to the final. I'm straight A's, man. I'm doing good in this class. I excel at it. He and I are friends. I did not turn in my final essay. That's 50% of my grade. We're in class, 110 people. And he looked at me and he said, Joe, you didn't turn in a final. You're going to fail. I said, no. I said, I wanted to do that orally here in class if you'd let me. And he looked at me and he smiled. He says, okay, by all means, go for it. He got on his stool. We were in this auditorium. He's up on a stage. He's on a stool behind his podium. He sits on his stool. And I stood up and I said, I just need one stipulation. He goes, what's that? I said, we live in the United States of America, yes? He goes, well, yes, we do. That's a fact. That's by definition. I said, okay, if you live in the United States of America, you are under the United States Constitution, correct? And I'm starting to walk down the stairs toward the stage. And he says, that's correct. And I said, and if you're under the United States Constitution, it draws its authority from the Declaration of Independence per its preamble. Is this not correct? And he thought for a second. He goes, yes, that is correct. And I said, and the United States Constitution says that all men are created equal. And I'm starting to walk up on the stage now. And he's getting a little apprehensive. And he goes, yeah. And I said, creation is the point of conception, is it not? Yeah. And now I'm up at the stage looking at him. We're about 20 feet apart. And I said, and that you have a right to life at the point of conception, according to the Declaration. And I'm starting to slowly walk toward him. And he goes, yeah. And I said, and according to the Constitution, the Declaration, those rights are granted by God. And he goes, yeah. And I said, therefore, God must exist. And you are a person at the point of conception. Therefore, abortion is illegal because it's murder. And now I'm real close to him. And he goes, yeah. Here's part of the story I left out. The very first day of class, when he gave us our final assignment, he also said that if I present you with a sound, valid, and rational argument, and you refuse to change your mind, you are not a rational being. And if you are not rational, you are not human, and you could be killed without any penalty. So I'm standing about 6 feet from Mike, and I stopped, and I looked at him, and I said, now, do you believe that God is real? And he goes, well, no. And he's smiling at me. I said, do you believe the unborn is a person? He goes, no. I said, is my argument sound? Mike goes, yeah. I said, is it valid? He goes, yes. I said, is it rational? He goes, yes. I said, is it based on definition? And he thought for a minute. He goes, yes. I said, so you now believe God is real and the unborn is a person? He goes, well, no. And I took a step toward him. I said, that makes you irrational. And at that moment, his eyes got wide and he got a little scared and he started to back up and he fell. Because he had stood up by this point, but he fell on his butt because he realized what he had just done. By his own definition, he was no longer human. And by the way, that argument cannot be broken. Meaning that if I ever made it in the Supreme Court and they rejected it, they are not legally justices. Nobody has ever broke that argument, ever. And some good people have tried. Because it rests on definitions. And before the end of today, you'll understand why that's important. Just figured I'd share that with you. I had fun with that day. All right, next. Logic transforms. The capacity to reason is essential to maintaining a free and self-governing society. This is why those people who push democracy also push dumbing down of its citizenry through education. If you cannot reason, then you're easily controlled, and you won't have a free and self-governing society. And that way they can get the masses to vote whatever way they want. This is why progressives, communists, socialists, secular humanists of all type always push pure democracy. It's easily manipulated, and it leads to tyranny, always. Always, always, always. There are no exceptions in history that I'm aware of. But before public debate can make any sense, individual citizens must learn how to reason properly, and proper reasoning is the whole aim of logic. This is why a republic is got to be founded on an informed, logical, reasoning society. And a society which reasons well and governs itself accordingly can and has changed the world. This nation is an example of that. I didn't cite it, but there's a very famous Jefferson quote basically saying that without an informed, well-reasoning society, tyranny must follow. And he's correct. So by understanding logic, we can tackle all of these things. And I cannot myself think of a better reason to study it. Others might not. You might want to reject it. But for me, it has kept me from a lot of error in my life. And it has helped me clarify who I am, what I am. It has helped me determine who I want to be, what type of person, and how best to get there. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not a Vulcan. I don't think pure logic all the time. Don't Don't get me wrong with that. I make mistakes, but that's what they are. They're mistakes in reasoning. So let's continue here now. Let's start with a little vocabulary. I forgot to put this one in there, and I should have. We'll start with the word definition. What is a definition? By definition, a definition is that which explains the form and function of a thing. I mean, we could look it up real quick if we want to, but we'll just do this off the cuff. What is a definition? A definition is an explanation of how we identify something. What makes it that thing? Definition of a cat. We might call it feline or whatever. It's a four-legged creature, usually with fur, that usually has whiskers. It meows, certain type of eyes, certain type of look, long tail, tends to fall on its feet. If we just start describing its form and its function. Chases mice or whatever. The Road to Concord. Definition: a noun, a statement of the meaning of a word, phrase, or a term, as in a dictionary entry. A statement in description of the fundamental character or scope of something. The act of or process of stating a precise meaning or significance, formulation of a meaning. Thank you, Charlie. Saved my bacon there.
That's from DuckDuckGo.
Okay. Oh, I like that one better than most. And on this show, we like to say form and function define. Now, I know that in our Hebrew scripture studies, on Wednesdays, we tell you that sometimes the Hebrews define things differently than we do. Not in this manner, not in this sense. Form and function still define. Not only what something looks like, what it's made out of, but what it does. When you put them two together, that's what defines something. Why is a definition important? Your definition is the bedrock of all human communications and logic, reason. It is the bedrock of natural law.
And that's why the progressives twist the definitions of words.
That's why they try to erase the definition of words. If they can erase them and turn them into sifting sand, then they can remake things at any given time just by changing their language. Yes. So if in logic I ever say by definition, I'm telling you that it is objectively true and you cannot argue with it and still claim to be rational. Now, argue meaning objective, object to it, unless if I've committed a fallacy. In other words, if I've inaccurately or inappropriately applied the definition. This can get complicated all in itself. It is one of the most simple things. It is one of the most complicated things. And I cannot believe I left this out of the slideshow today. This has got to be put back in for future use. I don't want to leave just yet. If I tell you it is true by definition, and you look at it, and you realize, okay, yeah, he applied the definition accurately, and it applies here. It works. Not only is that an objective fact, it is something that you cannot get around. You don't get to dismiss it. So when I told Mike, do we live in the United States? Well, yeah, we were in Florida. Well, that's the United States. We live under the Constitution. Well, nominatively, yes. The Founding Fathers and the Constitution both point to the Declaration as our founding document. It's a document of law. And when you understand it in proper sense, the Declaration of Independence is an international legal complaint. So that's our primary document of this country, like it or not. And it was up until the progressives came along and severed them. It was considered law by our courts. So you're under the Declaration, which tells you that there is a God and that you have the right to life from the moment of conception. Mike was stuck. It was all by definition. In order to argue with that, he had to go outside of those definitions, which would then, by definition, make him irrational. So Mike was stuck. And this is why nobody has ever defeated this argument. It cannot be broken. It can't. It's not possible. You can deny it, say, well, no, the Declaration of Independence doesn't have legal standing in this country. Founding Fathers said it did. Is there a higher authority than the men who actually wrote the document, ratified it, and put it into play? No. There is no higher authority. They are the expert on what they meant to do. I've read their words. They said it was the founding document. The Constitution points to it. It says in this 12th year of the United States of America. Well, if the Constitution's our founding document, how you been around for 12 years already when it's written? Whoopsie. So when I tell you by definition, that is one of the strongest logical statements that a philosopher can make. What you do then is look, okay, did he state the definition correctly? Did he apply it correctly? If he did, you're stuck. He's got you. That's check and mate, Jack. You're done. You can't object with that fact. So that is an important one that I cannot believe I left out. Some more vocabulary. A premise. A premise is a preposition. It's a statement, a declarative statement which must be either true or false. Premises are also used to construct arguments, which are in turn used to support a final declarative statement known as a conclusion. Now, let's go over this for a bit. Like I said, I want to go real slow, real simple with this. I'm not trying to talk down to anybody. I'm trying to be very clear to and easily understood. I'm teaching to the person who has never encountered this before, not in this form. Now, a premise is these are your premises in the scientific theory. Okay, these are the things you think to be true, or these are the things you know to be true, or know to be false, or whatever. Now, I told you here a premise either has to be true or false. This is correct, but in certain circumstances, a premise cannot be proven 100% true or 100% false. All we can know is a percentage of likelihood. For example, it is a premise that the sun is going to come up tomorrow. Now, colloquially, we know what that means. It means there's going to be a sunrise. You know, the earth is going to continue turning till we come back around at a point. For those of us who believe that the earth is a globe, if you don't, you believe that the sun is going to continue circling around the earth, you know, to the point where it's morning again. However you want to get there. I'm not arguing that today. The premise I'm looking at is we're going to have dawn again the next day. Well, most of us would say that's a statement of fact, but it isn't. By definition, you do not know that. Something could happen. The earth could get hit by a giant, another rogue planet that just destroys us. So from that purpose of that statement, it will not happen. Not that there's nobody here to perceive it, that there's no earth left to have a sunrise. So what we do, though, is we assign a probability to that. So a premise is either false or true. Even if all it is a high or low probability of being false or of knowing it for sure. But this is the thing. It's still false or true or true or false. It always is. It's just we can't be certain of which one it is. This is one of these things that's like the Schrodinger cat thing. You know, you've got this box. Schrodinger says there's a cat in the box. It's either dead or alive, and you don't know until you open the box. So until you open the box, it's both at the same time. Okay, that's kind of like a premise in most cases. Most premises are like this. And this is one of the problems people have when they start learning logic is they never get these foundational things in their head. So they say, well, I've learned logic and your premise has to be true or false. That is correct. That is objectively correct. That's an objective fact, but it doesn't mean you'll know which value to apply to that premise. You know, when I tell you, hey, the sun's coming up tomorrow, you probably will accept that as true, but we don't know that for sure. And that's one of the problems we run into is a good philosopher. If you're good at logic, when you know that you are outside of a certain type of understanding of your premise, you know, you always keep that little bit of doubt in your mind. You're just trained to always keep it there because it helps. It's a guardrail. It's a logical guardrail. So this is your premise. Your premise are basically the statements that you use to make up your argument. Next word I want us to look at is inference. An inference is the logical consequence of a premise. If you have premise A and premise B, and they're both true, then C must also be true. Well, if that's the case, C is the inference. And this is also known as logical extension. an example. If all fish have gills and John is a fish, the inference or the logical consequence or the logical extension is that John has gills. This causes so much trouble with people who don't understand logic. And man, you will catch me arguing with them sometimes. And I do mean heated arguments, trying to get them to understand the most simple thing. Okay. If all fish have gills and John is a fish, the inference, the logical consequence is that John has gills. But guess what else it is? John's a fish. John lives in water. Why can I make that conclusion? Because I know that fish live in water. So that what else can I conclude? Well, in his natural habitat, John is wet. Why can I conclude that? Because if you're living in water, you're wet by definition. You see where I'm going with this? Most people don't do that. They'll say, well, yeah, all you can say is that John has gills. You can't say he lives in water and that he's wet. Now, this is an oversimplification. But in a more complicated argument, I run into this all the time. And I'm like, little bunny foo-foo smacking the field mice. I say, hey, McFly, wake up. If John's a fish, yeah, he lives in water and he's wet, naturally in his normal state. Yes. But you'll run into people who just don't understand that. And you can't get it through to them because they have no conceptual understanding of the basics of logic. Our schools failed them on purpose. In my opinion, our school system does not teach logic for a reason. One of the reasons to learn logic, remember, for clarity and for understanding and things, it is very hard to fool somebody who understands logic well. If you catch him where he's not applying it, he doesn't have his logic motor turned on, you might fool him. But the moment he stops and turns it on, nope, he'll figure that out. Now you probably have a ticked off friend or a ticked off opponent on your hands because he realized you fooled him. He'll also be upset with himself for letting himself be fooled. But anyhow, so inference, logical inference. You'll hear me sometimes call it logical extension. It's also logical consequences. Okay, we need another example. If you quit breathing to the point where your heart stops beating and your brain quits working, you stop breathing and your heart quits beating and your brain stops working. The logical inference is you just died. Okay, what's the logical consequence from there too? I've died. What else? I'm going to assume room temperature, as Rush used to say. Well, why is that a logical consequence of dying? Because there's no longer a metabolic rate going on in your body to keep your body at 98 degrees. So you are going to assume whatever temperature of the environment. I know it's a crass or a crude example. You want another one? You're in an airplane. You're at 37,000 feet. And those little fans that make the airplane go stop. And they don't start again. What's the logical inference? No, crashing's one of them. My logical inference is that the screaming's going to start and the praying. See, I went in a different direction than you did, didn't I? Am I right? Oh, yeah. Do I know that for absolute certainty? No, the plane could be empty. But if you're on it, at some point or another, I've got a fairly good reason to believe that you're either going to start screaming or praying. See, these are logical inferences. This is how it works. And you have absolutely no idea how many people cannot grasp or wrap their head around this concept. I deal with it all the time when I'm trying to have a logical argument with somebody. They just cannot understand logical extension or logical consequence. This is an important one. So before we go to the break, remember, a premise, that's your preposition. Those are these are your facts, your assertions, the things you assume to be true, or you can state them as false. Okay, whatever problem you're dealing with, whatever your argument is, be like, go to our example here. All fish have gills. All mammals have lungs. John is a fish. John is not a mammal. Things like this. They're factual statements, but you could also say it is false to believe that if John is a fish, that John has lungs. You can't say that. Most premises are usually asserted as factual statements, but they can be negations. Just be aware of that, because sometimes when people put a negation, a false premise in their argument, they're usually trying to fool you. It's one of the indicators that you need to stand up and pay attention, because it's usually meant to confuse things, because it does. And I'm probably doing that right now, is confusing everybody. But your premise, the easiest thing for most of us to think about, those are just your set of factual statements in a scientific method. And your inferences are the conclusions you draw from those factual statements. That's the essence of it. That's the boil it down to the easiest way of looking at this. These two here, coupled with definition, we have got to have those under our belt. Those three. The definition, form and function define, that tells you what it is, what are you dealing with, and what does it do. A premise is a statement of fact, factual statements that are going to support your argument. And an inference is the conclusions drawn from those factual statements. Now, the big inference, the final one at the end of your argument, that's called a conclusion. We're going to get to that next when we come back from the break. Before we set up for the break, if I'm doing anything that's confusing people in the classroom, now's the time to send Charlie a message. Either email it if you don't want to be seen, type it in the comment section. Let us know if I've got anybody confused right now, because this class and the class we're going to do next week, we've got to get these terms under our belt before we can actually start dealing with logic. And this is something that you might want to listen to more than once. If you can get these terms under your belt, logic comes quick and easy. Once you understand the vocabulary, the language, the terms and definitions, logic actually gets to be quick and easy. Basic logic. All that we need to do for our own daily lives. You and I don't have to get into this complicated logic for proving some esoteric idea of a priori knowledge. Do I know something before I'm born, or am I born with a knowledge from my ancestors? Trust me, that is a monster mess in a philosopher's world. That'll cause fistfights. But as far as you and I are concerned, it's irrelevant. Doesn't matter. It's a waste of time. The only reason philosophers even get into that is to have something to say that their life is worth, trying to prove one way or the other to each other. We're going to focus on things that you can apply to your daily life that'll matter, that'll make an impact in your world. So we've got to get these definitions down. We're going to do some this week. We're going to do some next week. Once the definitions are down, then we can go address some other things. So if I've got you confused so far, if I've lost you, please let us know in the comment section. Charlie's going to take us, or he's going to give us a 6-minute break today. He'll put it on a loop. He'll give you time to go do whatever you got to do for a minute and then get back here in class. So we'll see you in about 6 minutes. Yeah, we went just a little long there. Sorry about that. Dip by DDT on the board comment says, not confusing, important information, just dry. Yes, brother, I know it is. I don't know how to spice this up without making it. I mean, I could teach it while acting a fool, channeling my inner Robin Williams, but then I run the risk of somebody not grasping this the way they should. Unfortunately, this is one of those subjects that it can be a little dry, but man, is it a powerful tool. It's like learning math. A lot of us don't like math. I got it, but how do I? Well, 1 + 1 is a 2. No. This isn't Sesame Street, guys. We're grown men and women here. I can't do that. Not to mention that the philosopher in me might think that's just marginal heresy if I acted that way. I mean, to a philosopher, basic logic is the same thing as the Old Testament is to a Christian, well, should be to a Christian, but you know what I'm getting at. I mean, it's there's a little bit of reverence here, at least for me. All right, let's get back to this. Hate math. Yeah, me too. Well, math is logic. Why do we study math? Well, math is logic and language is logic, and there's logic behind everything you do. We'll get to that. That's one of our definitions we do today. What is an argument? Well, that's when we get together and we bash each over the head with our El Kabong guitars. No. That's not an argument. Argument is composed of declarative statements, statements of fact, or a group of statements called premises. We've already covered what a premises is. These premises are used to support a final declarative statement known as a conclusion. What we did already, the one with all fish have gills. Johnny's a fish. Those are premises. And then, Johnny has gills. That's the conclusion. And all three together is an argument. In a case like this, I say that, Woodrow Wilson said, easy for me to say, Woodrow Wilson, in his essay, What is a Progressive, said that the goal of government is proper administration of the country. And he says, this means it's the area of science. And government should study administration. And he says that that's the way they're doing it in Europe, which at the time was called socialism. He says, so we need to do that here. But America will not accept socialism. Therefore, I have to sell it to them by another term. We will call it progress, because Americans like the idea of progress. But what he actually means, and when you read it, he doesn't do a statement on this one. He writes like 3 paragraphs on this. But what he actually means is we'll get to the goal of the administrative state known as socialism progressively, a little step at a time. So what is the inference from this? I'm going to conclude that Wilson intentionally deceived the American people by using a term he knew that they would embrace because progress, we're advancing into the future from the past. We're getting better and better at things, when he actually meant progressive steps towards socialism. So I'll conclude that he intentionally tried to deceive the United States. That's my conclusion. And I just gave you an argument. Now, I also gave you an argument based on Woodrow Wilson's own words. The only thing he did not say was that he intentionally wanted to deceive people. But he did say that he couldn't come out and tell them in the open because they wouldn't accept it. So how strong is my argument? It's an inductive argument. We'll get to that in a moment. And it's pretty darn strong because it's based entirely on his words. The only thing you have open to judge me on is whether or not I can say, because Woodrow Wilson said, I can't come out and say this in the open, the American people will reject it, so I've got to use a word that I know they'll embrace, but it'll actually mean I'll progressively get to this point that I really want to go, where I really want to get to, without them knowing it. Do I have sufficient cause to say he intentionally wanted to deceive the American people by using the term progress? I say yes. Others might disagree. Who's got the stronger argument, though? Well, as we'll see in a minute, that gets into the area of opinion in some cases. Conclusion. A conclusion is a declarative statement of probability of fact, which is drawn from one or more supporting statements. Sun's coming up tomorrow. That's both an argument and a conclusion. Yeah, I know it's one of the simplest arguments you can have, but it is an argument. The sun's coming up tomorrow. What's the premise? That the sun's coming up tomorrow. What's my conclusion? That the sun's coming up tomorrow. Well, what's the likelihood of it being true? Given our experience, 100%. Is it actually 100%? No. There is a chance that it won't happen, that the earth will be obliterated, but the chance is so small as to be zero. So, okay, good conclusion. What about my conclusion with Woodrow Wilson? Woodrow says that he wants the government to manage society through administration, the science of administration. That we're going to study it and we're going to set up elite schools to teach people to, they won't be elected. They'll just be appointed. They'll be technocrats trained in these special schools for how to administrate the country. Because he's going to imitate what he says they're doing in Europe. And he says, but America won't accept this. Well, I can't just come out and call it socialism or communism because the Americans would reject that. But I know that Americans like progress, bigger bridges, bigger buildings, faster planes. So I'll call this progressivism and they'll embrace it. But what I'm actually going to be doing is taking incremental steps. My progressive means incremental steps like Maximilian or Maximilius, whatever, gradualism. My progressive actually means incremental steps toward socialism. So I've constructed a political ideology and a name and everything designed to get me where I want to go and convince the American public to embrace it and support me in my effort. Now, my conclusion is that he intentionally sought to deceive the American people. How strong is my conclusion? Well, you have to assign a value to that. This is where judgment comes into play, even in logic. How strong is my argument? If you're a progressive, you might say, well, it's crap. It's real weak. That's not what he meant. I'm pointing to what he said, but, to what Wilson himself said. And he didn't say opposite of this. Another case in point. We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America. I argue that Barack Obama meant take us as far away from the founding fathers as he possibly could. But his supporters might have meant back toward a better America in the ideal that they understood America had meant. I don't know. That one is a weaker inference because his supporters might have actually understood what he was saying. So I don't know. That one's a weaker argument, but the one with Wilson, in my opinion, slam dunk, Jack. But others will disagree. That's a conclusion. Formal argument. A formal argument is symbolic in nature. Now, we've already talked about arguments. This is a type of argument. A formal argument is symbolic in nature and is widely used in areas such as mathematics. It replaces concrete expressions with abstract symbols to make it easier to examine the logical structure behind an argument. I got a little note in here. We will not be covering formal arguments at this time. Why? First of all, formal arguments, for the most part, those are thought games. And when it says it replaces concrete expressions with abstract symbols, remember I told you that certain logic will look like mathematical equations, look like calculus or huge physics problems on a chalkboard? That's formal argumentation. The concrete expression, meaning language that has meaning in your life, is replaced with a symbol. Like an if symbol. There's actually a symbol in logic for if. One of the symbols that I have, let's see if I hold this up. Craig. There. Can you see that? Got 3 little dots. Looks like the lights underneath one of these flying saucers, little triangular lights. If I draw 3 little dots like that on that's the symbol for therefore. That's literally logical shorthand for therefore. So if I was writing out a logical argument using the equation, and you saw those 3 little dots, that says, okay, therefore there's a conclusion or a sub-conclusion that follows. Those 3 dots means the word therefore. See, that's an abstract symbol, though, that replaces a thought, a concrete thought. We are not going to do formal arguments. There's no practical application in your life for this. That's just the world of us philosopher geek heads, man. So we're not going to go there. An informal argument. This is where we're going to live. An informal argument uses a non-formal criteria to evaluate an argument. In other words, we're not going to use formulaic. We're not going to use logical notation, the logical version of mathematical numbers. We're not going to do that. Put this another way, informal arguments use everyday language. So we're going to use everyday language in our arguments, which makes them informal. We're not doing mathematical shorthand. We're just going to use words. So another way to think of this, we're not going to do we're going to do our programming in old-fashioned BASIC that look like English. We're not going to program in HTML or even worse, binary. Binary is formal logic. Yes, actually it is. A binary code is a form of formal logic. We're not doing binary. We're going to use just basic language where it was if this, then that, back on your, your Texas Instrument or your Commodore 64 computer. Yeah, for those of you who are younger than I am, this is all going to be like, what is he talking about? Programming used to be easy, boys and girls. Use the same language you and I did. It used the language of informal argument. So an informal or rhetorical argument will be the primary focus of our study of logic on the road to Concord. Inductive reasoning. All right. Here's where things start to get fun. I'm going to read this and then I'm going to explain it. The process of inferring a conclusion based on multiple observations. This conclusion can be correct in certain situations, partially correct, or incorrect. To expand on this definition, a conclusion reached on the basis of evidence and reasoning, or the process of reaching such a conclusion. Sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook. And until somebody explain it, it is. What is an inductive argument? An inductive argument is an argument that you make from the quote unquote real world. I'm using a colloquialism here. It's the process of coming to a conclusion based on what you see and experience. Your conclusion can be 100% correct. Sun's coming up tomorrow. Your conclusion could be correct under certain situations, certain circumstances. If everything goes the way it did yesterday, the sun will come up tomorrow. Whatever.
Ivermectin can treat COVID.
Yes. Under certain circumstances. When you're almost dead, ivermectin's not going to help you anymore. So this is your scientific method is always an inductive reason. It's an inductive argument. It's inductive reasoning. You can test inductive reasoning with further observation. You can have an inductive reasoning where your conclusion is wrong. Case in point, the Declaration of Independence has nothing to do with the United States Constitution or the founding of this nation. Okay, based on what? Well, based on the observation of the last 150 years of jurisprudence in America. Okay, well, that's based on observation. It's factually wrong. How do you know that, Joe? Because the men who wrote it, ratified it, and put it into place and connected it to the Constitution said it is the founding document. Well, what do they know? They are the definer of that document. They defined it. They frame it. They frame the what and where of it, the who, the form and function. There's nobody else that can do that. They are the highest authority. So you don't get to argue with them. If you do, you're irrational. So the inductive reasoning from the progressive point of view is that the Declaration of Independence has nothing to do with the Constitution is wrong. Factually wrong. It is an inductive argument based on observation, but it's a factually incorrect argument. Same thing with abortion. Abortion's legal. Why? How's it constitutional? Well, the right to privacy. Wrong. We've already taken you through that argument. That was an inductive. Well, in that case, that's a deductive argument. We'll get to that next. But inductive is based solely on observation. To expand on the definition, a conclusion is reached on the basis of evidence and reasoning. Evidence and reasoning. The argument that Woodrow Wilson intentionally sought to deceive the American people, that's an inductive argument. Okay. An inductive argument takes what you see and you have to add judgment to it as well. You have to evaluate how strong the premises are in that argument. I'm trying to come up with another one. Got one for you. Red sun in morning, sailor take warning. I saw a red sun today. So that, if you understand the saying, red sun in the morning, sailor take warning means that there's going to be bad weather today. The sun was red coming up today. We're going to have bad weather today. Are we? I don't know. We're going to have to wait and find out. What is the strength of your argument? A folk tale, a wives' tale, a saying. What's the saying based on? Preponderance of evidence in the past. Usually whenever you see the red sun in the morning, you end up having bad weather that day. So, am I going to have bad weather today? Well, I live in Florida. I could have bad weather any day. Or the weatherman could say 100% chance of storm today, and I don't get nothing but sunny skies. So we all know that the saying isn't going to be 100% accurate. So how much trust do you put in it? That's a judgment call, isn't it? That's an inductive argument. It's inductive reasoning. Most of what we do is inductive reasoning. That's most of what we do all day long. These are usually these are not the strongest arguments you can make, but these tend to be, an inductive argument tends to be the one that you're going to end up making most of the time, because you can't make deductive arguments for everything. And that brings us to the next argument. Oh, also note, an inductive argument are based on observations. This makes inductive reasoning the logic of science, as science is based on observation and testing. The next one is a deductive reasoning. The process of inferring a conclusion based on the truth of the premise alone. If the premises in a deductive argument are true, it is impossible for a deductive conclusion to be false. An example, if all men are mortal, is that true? Yes. And Socrates is a man. Was Socrates a man? Yes. Therefore, Socrates must be mortal. There's no other valid conclusion. Deductive reasoning. Oh boy. Whenever I want to make an argument that is tight, strong, just, you can't get around it, I try to make deductive arguments. Look what it just said. If the premises are true, you cannot get around the argument. The conclusion must be true. Do you live in the United States? Yes, I do. Do you nominally live under the United States Constitution? Nominally means at least in word, at least in we believe we do, we pretend we do. I do. Up top. Arctic Tortoise said, did you just say science came from logic? Yes. Science is a subset of logic. So back what we were talking about, a deductive reasoning, deductive argument. Do you live in the United States? We live in the United States. Yes. Statement of fact. We nominally live under the Constitution. Statement of fact. That's true. The Declaration of Independence is the source of authority for the United States Constitution. Okay, that's the weakest point of my argument. Why do I make that claim? Because the people who wrote it stated it as a fact. Ooh, the author says it's true? That's a fact. You live under the Declaration. The Declaration declares that there is a God. We hold these truths to be self-evident. There's a creator. You are created with the right to life. Created, conception. Ergo, the unborn is a person with a God-given right that cannot be taken by the mother. Abortion is unconstitutional. Period. Full stop. It is a deductive argument that cannot be broken. Can't get around it. Anybody who says they can is being irrational. If you're irrational, you cannot be, you can be a judge. You shouldn't be a judge. And a society that knows how to reason would not allow you to be a judge, because I cannot trust your judgment. Deductive reasoning is not as common as inductive. But when you find it, if it's what we call tight, if it's sound, valid, and rational, if the premises are true, the conclusion's going to have to be true. There's usually no way around it. You're stuck. You have to accept the conclusion, or you have to accept that you're irrational.
Okay, I want to throw something out here and see how this works.
Okay.
Because I like your example here. If all men are mortal and Yeshua is a man, therefore Yeshua must be mortal.
Is Yeshua only a man?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
Exactly. Here's the point of evaluating a deductive argument. Let's look at your premises. All men are mortal. Scripture says so. You are appointed to die once, then be judged. You are mortal. Sin entered the world, you will die. Until the world is remade, all men are mortal. Socrates, okay, Yeshua. Yeshua is a man. He's fully man. Does Scripture say he's anything else? He's fully man, but what else is he?
He's the son of Yahweh.
Yeah. What's that make him?
Mm,
Can you pick your life back up after you're dead?
Nope.
Did he?
Yep.
Per his own expression?
Yep.
So he's more than a man, isn't he?
Yep.
So at best, your premise that Yeshua is a man is partially true, but not fully true, which in this case makes your premise false,
Ah, okay.
which means your conclusion would be wrong.
Okay.
See, folks, logic is very, very powerful for helping you ascertain what you should and shouldn't believe. It's pretty easy once you learn the rules. Once we get the language under our belt, this week and next week, it'll be a little drier, but after that, it'll get fun. Some of them, we'll pick arguments out of the headlines and we'll evaluate them and we'll watch how fast and easy it is to slice through their gobbledygook. Now, at best, it's just going to make you more resolute in what you believe and why you believe it. I mean, it's until more of us start doing this again in this country, it's not going to change the world, but it did at one point. The Reformation, that changed, that was applied logic to the church. The Great Enlightenment, that was applying logic to society. Just remember, logic has limits. It's not the be all end all to everything. A Vulcan society would never survive long enough to get into space. But that's something to talk about when we get toward the end of a class and we got a little bit of time left. So deductive reasoning. Note, deductive arguments are based in an abstraction. This makes deductive reasoning the logic of abstract theory. I got to change that word there. As abstract theory is based on supposition. In other words, whenever you're talking about black holes, that's deductive reasoning. Because you have no way you can observe the black hole a little bit, but you got no way to directly test them. You can't get there. A lot of your observation is based on assumptions. So that's deductive reasoning as well as inductive. But in this case, it's all based on it's theory. It's deductive reasoning is theory reasoning, because you're going to say, the black hole exists and it means that it's infinite gravity and blah, blah, blah. And I state all these things and then I draw my conclusion. Well, my conclusion is based on whether or not all my premises are true. And I've done my reasoning correctly without any mistakes. So the cool thing about deductive reasoning, and it's totally self-contained, but then you got to go back and evaluate whether or not the premises are actually true. That's like using a man's science to explain God and his powers. Correct. Yes. But inductive reasoning can take our observation of the universe that God has made, man's observation of God's creation, and we can infer some things of God's character in nature, his name, his Shem, because he made things to operate by a certain order that never changes. We know that our creator is a God, a creator of order that never changes, which, by the way, happens to be, isn't that Micah? I am Yahweh, I do not change. So That's how science was actually developed, by Christians seeking to understand the Creator better, his nature and way of working. Okay. Got through that. I'm making a few notes. I got to quit doing slideshows at night, or I got to get Charlie to proofread them in the morning. Here's another key concept in logic. What do we mean by valid? This only applies to deductive reasoning. Well, primarily. Okay, primarily applies to deductive reasoning. An argument is said to be valid if it takes a form where it is impossible for the premise to be true and the conclusion to be false. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Socrates must be mortal. That's a valid argument. Note, an argument does not have to have true premises to be valid. It has to have a conclusion that must be true if the premises were also true. What do I mean? Let me explain to you. We know who Socrates is in history, right? The Socrates, the Greek philosopher. All fish have gills. Socrates, the Greek philosopher Socrates, is a fish. Therefore, Socrates has gills. That's a valid argument. But one of the premises is false. The historical Greek philosopher figure Socrates was not a fish. Now, I know this is complicated. We will circle back to this in a future show. Right now, just understand the word for the moment. Valid means that if your premises are true, the conclusion must be true. Or just assume the premises are true. Is the conclusion true if the premises are true? That's all you got to care about to make it valid. It's important. We'll get to more of this. This is something we'll come back and do an entire show on. The next thing is sound. Again, it's deductive reasoning. An argument is said to be sound if it is both valid and the premises are actually true. So when all fish have gills, Socrates, the historical Greek philosopher man, is a fish, then Socrates has gills. That's invalid. That's valid rather, but it's unsound. Excuse me. It's valid because the conclusion is correct based on the premises. But it's unsound because one of the premises is false. This is part of where I have we spent an entire week on this subject, valid and sound, when we were in logic school. Let me try and recapsulate this, because I know it's dry crap. I know it's dry. But if you're going to learn logic, you have to understand. This is one of the things you must understand, especially with deductive arguments. Assume that the premises are true. Just assume they are. Does the conclusion, does that have to come from the premises? If the premises are true, does the conclusion have to also be true? If that's the case, the argument's valid. Sound. The argument's sound. Are the premises actually true? That's that one. Then there's another one in there. We'll get into it at a later date, but you'd also look for fallacies at the same time. But look, are the premises true? If they're true, then the conclusion must also be true. That's sound. You want a sound and valid argument. But there's one other thing that you're going to need that most people don't bring up, but you need to bring this up. This is important too. Is it rational? In a deductive reasoning argument, an argument is said to be rational if it is both sound and valid, and the conclusion is reasonable. By reasonable, we mean that the conclusion does, or has a real possibility that it could actually exist in the real world. Here. One-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eaters exist. John exists. John's a one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. Well, actually, that's a bad example because it's invalid. But you know what I'm getting at. Let's just make up an argument where we conclude that John is a one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. This is from an old 60s song, folks. Okay. So I set up an argument where it's sound and valid, and we conclude that John is a one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. Is that rational? Are we going to find a one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater running around the world? We have absolutely nothing to expect that in our reality. Nowhere in history. So no.
With
No.
virtual reality and AI, maybe.
I don't know. But to put one in a world that our audience might actually accept. Okay, I've got the beast of Revelation is going to exist according to prophecy. I can make a sound valid argument for that. But now, if I declare that the beast is literally going to be a living, breathing thing running around that looks like a leopard, bear, and a lion, and it's going to have 7 heads and 10 horns and all this stuff, is that rational? No, not even by the biblical standards. It is not. John plays for the Vikings. The Arctic tortoise is applying logical extension. Yes. Anyhow, going back to our example out of the book of Revelation, no, it is not rational, because nowhere in the scriptures do we actually see monsters like that running around on earth, even though they're described even in the Old Testament. You don't see them. Greece was a monster. It was described, Arctic tortoise again. Yes, in Minneapolis. Seen it on Sunday TV trying to beat the steel curtain. Tortoise, back to your shell. But what I'm trying to get at here for is rational. The conclusion has to make sense. So what we're looking for is sound, valid, rational arguments. Those are the tightest ones, the best ones. The next word I want you to understand or be aware of is a fallacy. In simplest terms, a fallacy is a mistake in the logical process by which a conclusion is drawn. In other words, how do you evaluate your premises? Fallacy can render the conclusion of an otherwise valid argument false. At the same time, an argument may actually be fallacious, yet the conclusion is still true. We'll cover all of this at a later class. Fallacies can be powerful tools, but they can also be tricky to apply in the proper manner. It can be hard to get down. A few additional terms we should know. By definition, we've already covered that one. I actually did put that one in there. Yay, Joe. It necessarily follows. No, you've heard me use this one before. This is logical necessity. We've covered that a little bit, but this one in here I want to drive home. It necessarily follows, also known as logical necessity, is a logical concept that states that if one thing is true, another thing must follow it. For example, if an object is dropped from a building and nothing impedes its path to the ground, it necessarily follows that that object will fall to the ground. In this world, as we understand the world, now understand this is an inductive argument here because we don't know that it will fall to the ground. But if I'm on Earth or the moon or whatever, and I drop it, the rock, whatever, it's going to fall. It's going to fall. Why? Gravity. It's got to fall. Logical necessity. If I jump off of a boat into the water, it necessarily follows that I'm going to get wet because I jumped into the water. Well, you were wearing a wetsuit. I'm still wet. Maybe not on my skin, but I'm still wet. I'm covered in water. Y'all get what I'm saying? I hope. Necessarily follows. You'll hear philosophers or people who know logic say this sometimes. And a lot of times we forget that you may not understand what we're saying because we'll get really adamant about that. That's necessary. It's necessary. It has to be. In other words, I can't find one without the other. If I say it's necessary in a logical sense, it means that the two things, they're inextricably connected. You cannot extricate them from one from the other. You want a perfect example? It is necessary that a Reese's cup have both chocolate and peanut butter. That's a necessary. It's necessary that there's peanut butter inside a Reese's cup. Why is that necessary? Because that's a definition of a Reese's cup, peanut butter inside chocolate. So it's necessary that there's going to be peanut butter at the center of the Reese's cup. That's a necessary conclusion. This is an important logical concept. Let's see what else we got. I put another one up there for us. Breaking an argument. You've heard me use this several times. Breaking an argument is a logical term that means you have shown that the conclusion of that argument does not hold up under logical scrutiny. Example, if I can show that a deductive argument is unsound, invalid, and irrational, I have broken the argument. I mistyped again. Note, I may be able to break an argument by proving only one of these things. All right, that slide is, yeah. I'll have to improve that one. This is what happens when you make slides in the middle of the night. How do I break an argument? Let's see. Oh, Joe, the Declaration of Independence has nothing to do with the Constitution. What's your argument? Well, the Supreme Court said so. The people who wrote it, ratified it, and put it in place said otherwise. Well, what's their authority? They wrote it, ratified it, and put it in place. They are the authority. I just broke the Supreme Court's argument. It's a factual break. It is objectively true that the Founding Fathers said that the Declaration is our founding document, that it carries the weight of law under their system of government. They said so. They wrote it. They put it in place. They used it up until at least 1826 in that manner. They did. The founders, the people who put it there, used it as law. The Supreme Court cannot come along 100 years later and erase that and claim to have a sound and valid argument. They do not. You've broken their argument. Andrew Wilkow likes to say, the arguments on his show cannot be broken. What he means is you can't get around them. Try to break the argument about the fact that if you're in the United States under the Constitution, then you're under the Declaration, which means there is a God and you are created with the right to life at the moment of conception. Try to get around that one. The weakest point you're going to have is the fact that the Declaration is part of the law. The problem with that is once you go to the Declaration, you're going to run into the Founding Fathers who told you it is law. You're not going to be able to break that argument. You can't. It's by definition. If I tell you that the screen behind this shoulder here, that right down here, this area of the screen is black. What's the definition of black? Absence of color. It appears to be this color in our eyeballs, black. And then this part of the screen is black. That is an argument that you can't get around because it rests entirely on definition. So by definition, this area of my screen where my hand's over it, it's black. You can't break it. You can't. Well, no, Joe, it's white. No, by definition, you can't do that. It's not white. Doesn't meet the definition. Say, well, it only appears black. I also told you the definition of black is the absence of all color. Color is the reflection of light. There's no light here. So yeah, you're playing semantics, but you still haven't gotten around the argument. So that area of my screen appears to be black. This is what I mean by breaking an argument. You can't break it or you can break it. If I say that this part of my screen, the chalkboard, that appears, that's solid green. Well, no, Joe, there's white writing on there, and then there's different colors and shades of green and what looks like a yellow tint to it. It's not solid green. I've broken the argument. I've proved that the argument's not true. This is probably one of the most important things that we can learn to do, especially when we're dealing with politics. Learning how to break an argument. And we're going to spend some time on that, focused time on that, a couple of weeks. Now, let's put a few of these concepts together real quick before we end the day. What is logic? Simply put, logic is the study of correct reasoning, also known as right reasoning. How are we putting that together? Right here, reasoning. Logical or right reasoning is a mental process by which a conclusion is drawn through the application of a rigorous system of evaluation. Reasoning starts with a set of premises. Remember, that's a true or false proposition or statement. Once this set of premises are stated, they are then used to draw inferences, which is the logical conclusion of a premise, construct arguments, a set of premises supporting a conclusion, and draw conclusions, a declarative statement drawn from the sum total of the premises in an argument, according to the known and fixed set of rules governing that of logic. That's what reasoning is, right reasoning. Inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is based on observation. It can be tested by additional observation. Essentially, inductive reasoning is the foundation of the scientific method. By its very nature, inductive reasoning can never conclusively prove anything. At best, it can only provide a probability for a predicted outcome.
Trust the science.
Yes. Inductive reasoning has a much broader application than deductive reasoning. But care must be taken to remember the limitations on the level of certainty it can provide us. So what does that mean? If I take a guess about a black hole and a guess about this and a guess about the age of the world, carbon dating. Do you have any idea how many different levels of supposition are in that process? We'll go into it someday. But for right now, trust me, there's 6 or 7 levels of supposition there. And each one has an uncertainty principle. And you have to understand how uncertainty principles work. Now we're in mathematics. It's a different form of logic, but you add them. They start building up exponentially. And then when you add the last one, the guy who invented carbon-14 radio dating said that it doesn't work because we have not reached equilibrium in the atmosphere yet, which is a prerequisite to being able to radioactive carbon-14 dating. He said that the process does not work because we don't have the logically necessary condition for it to work. Ergo, every carbon-14 dating you've ever done is invalid. That's the problem with inductive reasoning. You have to evaluate how strong each premise is and then add them together with your uncertainty principle. It's like, I'm 90% certain of A, I'm 90% certain of B, I'm 90% certain of C. So therefore D. Well, there's a 30% uncertainty level of D. What? Yes. Not a 10%, 30% uncertainty of D. That's how that works. Inductive reasoning is the one we're going to do the most in this world, but it's also the one that's least certain. Deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is more limited in its application because it is based in abstraction. However, deductive reasoning can also provide us with the highest levels of certainty when and where we can use it. It can be shown that a deductive argument is sound, valid, and rational. If it can be shown, it is almost impossible to break it. In other words, a deductive reasoning can come as close to absolute proof as logic can provide for. An example, a deductive argument that relies entirely on definition cannot be broken by definition. So if I make an argument that relies strictly on definitions, you cannot break it. You know, that's as certain as you are ever going to be able to be about anything. And that's by definition. And this is why we covered, what does a definition mean? This is why I know it's dry material. I got it, guys. I'm glad you're sticking with me because this is important stuff. This week and next week, we get the language under our belt. Then after that, I can start really teaching you some cool things about how to use logic. But this has got to be done first. It just has to be. It's one of the reasons most people don't want to do it. Sound, valid, and rational. In constructing a deductive argument, the goal is to construct it so that it is sound, valid, and rational. If a deductive argument is sound, valid, and rational, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to break, and therefore highly reliable. Build your house on that. It's going to be the last slide for today. I have an argument. Let's go inductive first, down at the bottom of your picture. Let me slide myself down here. So I have an inductive argument, and the conclusion follows the premises with a certain probability. High, low, I don't know. If it's a high level of probability, that means I have a strong conclusion. Then I go look for 2 other things. Is it cogent? In other words, is it rational? Does it make sense? If so, I have a strong probability that the conclusion is true. I have a strong probability that the conclusion the sun is coming up tomorrow is true. If it's irrational, well, then I tend to just throw the argument away. John, it's going to be a one-eyed flying purple people eater flying around the world tomorrow. To me, as long as he's not a Viking, I guess, tortoise, I'm going to throw that away as irrational. Now I have an inductive argument. My carbon-14 dating says that this thing is 56,000 years old. That is actually a very weak conclusion. And if it's weak, it's uncogent. It's not rational. It's not believable. Not when you actually understand carbon-14 dating. Now, I know a lot of you out there are going to start telling me you're wrong about that, Joe. You better do some research. The guy who invented the process came back later and said, oopsie. You know, the inventor said it doesn't work, and he's correct. There's a lot of evidence to that. So now let's go back up to an argument. I've made an argument. This time it's deductive. Conclusion necessarily follows the premises. Now, is it a valid argument? Say, yeah, okay, it's valid. Is it sound? Yes. Well, then the premises must be true. The conclusion must be true. Therefore, I can trust that argument. It's true. If you argue with it, you're irrational. Ergo, my logic professor, Mike. But what if the argument is valid, but it's unsound? In other words, the conclusion does follow the premises if the premises are true, but one of the premises is not true. Well, that's an unsound argument. The conclusion might actually still be true. It might, but the reasoning is faulty. So how well you're going to want to lean on that reasoning. A progressive says, well, we've got to do something because big business is just getting out of hand. And they go through their reasoning, you know, they're just stealing from everybody and blah, 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 blah. I can break that progressive argument. I actually have before on this show several times. I can break it. I can shatter it. But does it mean their conclusion is false? No, it doesn't. I happen to agree with their conclusion because it can be shown that major corporations left unchecked get out of hand. Microsoft, anybody? Facebook, anybody? So even though you have a true conclusion, I don't trust your argument whatsoever. And if I don't trust your argument, I don't trust your reasoning, the line of reasoning, your use of logic, which means I don't trust your reasoning personal, your personal grasp on the world. So although you have a true conclusion, I'm throwing your argument away. I got to look for some other way to explain it or deal with it. The conclusion might be true. Your reasoning is garbage. Now, what if I have a deductive argument that's invalid? Well, then it's unsound. I can throw it away. In other words, that the conclusion doesn't come from the premises. They're not true. Well, throw it away. Don't need to even use it. Okie dokie. Getting close to the end of the day. Now, I know we've covered a lot today, and I know we have. And I've tried to cover it slow. And let's see, Julie Larson. Most people tend to use irrational arguments before valid arguments because they speak before they think. Yes, Julie. Yes. Hey, amen, amen, and amen. What we just went over, when you're new to it, you got to think to put your arguments together using these tools. You got to think them through. But there comes a point where if you do it enough, it's just second nature. That's why even when I don't even have the logic machine turned on, a lot of times you're still going to have a hard time dealing with me when I'm speaking off the cuff, because it's second nature to me, because that's what, I'm a philosopher. That's what I do for all. It's part and parcel of who I am. You could get there or closer to it. And one of the reasons, I know the definitions are tough. I get that. They're dry, they're boring, blah, 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 blah. But here's the thing, folks. Once you understand the definitions, you got 60, 70% of logic under your belt. Yes, you do. Because then all logic is properly applying the definitions. That's it. Like if you got Lincoln Logs, remember Lincoln Logs, little toys that you build with, or Legos? Whatever one you want. Once you have a Lego or a Lincoln Log, learning how they go together, then you can build whatever you want just by putting the pieces together in the proper order. Once you understand the language we're using, it goes together quick and easy. Dip by DDT says, the question is if powers to be are not rational and stray from the Constitution, and the Constitution states we have responsibilities to overthrow those powers, how do you do that when they don't follow it? First of all, it's the Declaration of Independence that says you have the right to alter or abolish. It doesn't say overthrow. The language is very important right there, Dip. It says you have a right to alter or abolish. And it's assumed that you're going to replace it with a different government. In our case, the Constitution gives us the process by which we do that. If those people will not do it, then you're still back at the Declaration. And you're back at the implied understanding behind the Declaration. It's not written. You go back to the rule of nature, law of nature, and you're in open warfare with the government. In which case you are obligated to do the very first thing that the founding fathers did. They formed a colonial government. So before you can go into open revolt legally, righteously, according to natural law, the people of your area are going to have to get together and form another government. You're not going to get that done in this country. And this is why I tell you, we're not going to fix this stuff, because we are not the people we need to be. Why? Well, for one thing, we don't understand reasoning anymore. We don't know how to reason. That's been taken from us on purpose. And if you learn how to do logic, how to reason, well, it may not save the country, but it might help you. It will help you in your personal life very well. The better you get at it, the more it helps. And the reason we have to do Road Dog 71, Puff the Magic Dragon is a valid sound, rational song. LOL, sorry for the repeat. Yeah. We're going to have to do something with Road Dog. That boy ain't right. Hey, Sailor Son, smack your classmate in the back of the head there for me. If everybody was in the class, I could just see him doing that too. Smack on Road Dog. I have a fight in the back of the classroom. Anyhow, I got you. I understand that not everybody's stuck with this class all the way through. If you watched it, if you have time, either pull out the definitions and study them for a little bit or watch the class again, if it helps. You got to get this under your belt. Next week, we're going to finish up with the definitions. There's other things like, what is a fact? What do we mean by tight? A few other things. We've got to get some more definitions under our belt. Once we understand the concepts and the terms, then I can put all this stuff together quick and easy for you. We're not going to go through how to make a formal argument with the if-then statements and all that stuff. We'll touch on it, but we're not going to get into, I'm not teaching you a logic class. I'm teaching you informal logic in a way that you can apply now quickly in your daily life. So what we'll do is we'll get the definitions under our belt, we'll get them down. We'll understand a little bit more about how they work together. We'll do a class on how they function together. And then we'll talk about fallacies and how to evaluate things. Maybe 5 weeks, and you will, Road Dog says, ouch, that hurt. Give me about 5 weeks, and you'll have a really decent understanding of how just basic informal logic and argumentation works. And if you work on it in your personal private life, you're going to be surprised at what it does for you. I mean, right down to advertising, the ads that are pitched at you. Logic will help you fend off, attempts to manipulate your thinking when it comes to buying something. Logic is a very powerful tool, but at the same time, it has limits. Remember what we were doing with the inductive reasoning. There comes a point where you've got to use your personal judgment whether or not the conclusion makes any sense. It could be sound, valid, and rational, but it doesn't make any sense to you. Even though it's rational, yeah, that could happen, but it's not going to happen. Joe said an asteroid could destroy the Earth, but that ain't going to happen. See? Logic doesn't address that issue. It can't. That's that fuzzy feel-good gut feeling now. There's still a logic to that, but that's a spiritual logic, and that's outside the realm of what we're discussing today. So, next week, we'll finish up with our definitions. Yeah, I know, a little dry, but you get those two under you. You get through that pain, then it gets fun. If you don't get lesson 1 and lesson 2 under your belt, 3, 4, and 5 are not going to make any sense to you. And I'm not going to go back and explain them either. So make sure you cover this. Be here next Tuesday, too. Tomorrow, we're going to continue on our slideshow with Revelation and reading the prophets. Bumpy road. Sit down, have your scriptures with you, notepad. If you haven't already done so, go to last Wednesday's show notes on theroadtoconcord.com. Pull up the slideshow. Maybe read ahead a little bit. Thursday, we're going to start just looking back on in time on some more of the progressive founding and the more progressive founding fathers of the progressive movement. We're going to do a little history work there. And then Friday, we're in another chapter of our book. So we're going to get all this done, folks. We're going to keep going through it. Series through the summer. Easy summer. You know what we're going to be doing. No roller coasters for you. We're just going to skate through the summer. Summer class, man. It's a short semester. We got to keep it easy. If you like what we're doing, please share it. Tell everybody that I am an acquired taste. I mean, I know I'm an idiot. I got that. Tell them to focus on the material. It might be a little dry sometimes, but it's useful. It will change your life if you start applying all of it. And it'll help protect you in a lot of ways. So ask them to give us time. Class builds on itself. If you're watching us and you're liking what we're doing, please at least hit the thumbs up or the like buttons or whatever. Come on, man. If you're on social media, share the show. So maybe somebody just out of the blue will catch it and catch on to it. Help us spread the show a little bit. If you can do that much, can't you? If you listen to us regularly and you haven't already done so, please sign up to follow us on Rumble. If nothing else, at least you get the notifications when we do the shows and you won't miss anything. Get reminded. If we are enough of a value in your life and you have the means to do so. I don't want you to do this if you literally, honestly, seriously can't do so. But if you can afford to, we're asking everybody to give us $5 a month, man. Just go to our donate page. It's in the description on Rumble. It's in the top of the comment section everywhere else. It's on the top of the blog page. Just sign up. $5 a month. If you can, a little more. We literally use that to keep the lights on around here and to keep all the different programs that we have to pay for. We use it to keep the show running. We're going to need your help or we won't be here all that long. So it's up to you. Love each and every one of you. Thank you for being here. Y'all stay safe. We'll see you tomorrow.